Good morning. My name is Cindy Stewart. I am Operations Manager for Cadre and your instructor today. We are working on continuity of operations planning. I have with me our Executive Director, Marcia Hovey. Marcia, would you give us just a tiny bit about you and maybe a little bit about Cadre?
Oh, sure. Good morning and welcome to those that are not from our county. I think we might have a couple, and that's very cool. That's one of the reasons we like to have Zoom meetings, because we can share information more broadly and we make new friends and new partners. So I've been the executive director of Cadre officially since 2020. Before that, I was an emergency manager in Santa Clara County for 20 years, 25 years, working for local government. And so when I transitioned over to nonprofit, I brought my emergency management hat with me, and am realizing every day how valuable the non-government sector is and how much of an untapped resource they are. So the fact that you're here wanting to make sure that you can stay working and operational when a disaster happens does my heart good. I sleep better at night when I know that people are actively making sure that they're going to be prepared. Cadre has been around since 1989. We are the VOAD, Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster for Santa Clara County. We have supported every disaster since 1989. We are currently developing, to support the VOAD, a series of 20 community support networks, and those networks are bringing in people that don't traditionally think of themselves as part of a disaster. They just are different professions. Mental health, veterans, animals, sheltering. Some of them are and some of them aren't. Faith-based, businesses, children. That's all I'll think of off the top of my head. But the point is to bring them to the table in a very non-threatening way. We're not telling them to spell ICS or do anything beyond what they do on a day-to-day basis, but we do want to teach them about the emergency management structure that exists during disasters, and to work within those guidelines. So in a disaster, they can come into our coordination meetings and hear in real time what's going on. And then if they see that there's a way that they might want to help, they're right there at the table, and we can use all of the resources that are available in Santa Clara County, because who doesn't want to help when you know that there's a need? But if we're just if you're just watching it on the news, you may not realize the needs there are. So anyway, this is our big Herculean task for the next couple of years, is trying to herd the cats into some kind of a network. We're also recruiting volunteers over the age of 55 because we got a grant to do that. So if you would like a remote opportunity to work 1 or more hours with us wherever you live, we would love to talk to you, because we have been asked to recruit 1,000 volunteers, and that's a lot. And I will turn it back over to Cindy now. You're in very good hands. She has a ton of experience writing COOPs for local government and doing this training. So take it away, Cindy.
Here we go. So continuity of operations planning, or COOP. We're going to talk about that at a high level, and particularly as it pertains to community-based organizations or non-governmental organizations. This slide is a little premature, but I did also want to talk a little bit about continuity of operations planning in the introductions. First of all, though, I would love for you to just take a moment and tell us who you are and what organization you're with. So let me give you just a little bit about my background. I started off as a corporate trainer, and began working with the County Office of Emergency Management as a grants manager, and then transitioned from that to an emergency manager. In 2009, I was tasked with Santa Clara County has 53 departments within the county itself. And I was tasked with getting all of those departments' COOP plans for each individual department. So I started my COOP knowledge back in 2009. I believe they still do have 53 individual department COOP plans in Santa Clara County. Years ago, retired, I'm using air quotes, and moved from the government's profit side and became the operations manager for Cadre. Because of my COOP background, in between coming to COOP, I did write plans for a few of the cities in our county, write COOP plans and walk a couple of the cities in our county through the COOP process as well. Since I've come on board with Cadre, I see that nonprofits need the COOP process and the plan, and it's very confusing for nonprofits, I believe. I've taught several different COOP plans, COOP trainings, COOP 101, talking specifically about essential functions, talking specifically about alternate facilities and MOUs, talking specifically about delegation of authority and succession planning and all of those kind of elements of COOP, and trying to translate that to nonprofits. And I think that there's a little bit of a gap or a disconnect there. So this presentation is a little bit different from the others that I've done, and it's more focused on the nonprofit sector and moving in that direction. But one of the things that I wanted to tell you is that as a nonprofit, you're not required to have a COOP. Government agencies down to the county level, at least, are required by the federal government to have a continuity of operations plan. However, as a nonprofit, you're not required to do it, but we'll talk a little bit more about why you should anyway. The government has specific elements, 10 specific elements of their COOP planning, and we'll talk a little bit about those. However, like I said, this is going to be focused more specifically on nonprofit COOP. And so there are some things in the 10 elements that I don't think translate very well. So we will talk a little bit more about that as we go through the presentation. So I've kind of decided to try and make this a little bit simpler and a little bit more focused on nonprofits. So the agenda for today is, what's the point? Why are we even here? Why are we talking about COOP? Why are we trying to create COOP plans? What should we be thinking about when we do our planning? How do we navigate some of the challenges that nonprofits have when it comes to planning for COOP? And then let's just dig in a little bit to how do we develop a plan? How do we implement that plan? And then how do we test it? And then we'll talk a little bit about wrapping it up and doing some final thoughts. Okay. By the way, stop me anytime and ask questions. This is an interactive opportunity for you to get questions answered about COOP or other things that Cadre is doing throughout the presentation. So that's entirely up to you. So what's the point of even having a COOP? Well, first of all, having a COOP ensures that you can get those essential functions, those critical things that your agency needs to do, whether there's a disaster or not, either because they are mandated by some grant or by some government entity, or your board has required you to keep certain things open, or your residents or your clients are depending on you to have certain functions in place. Those would be considered critical functions. And we'll talk a little bit more about how to determine which ones are critical and which ones are not. And I'll give you some examples that might surprise you just a little bit about what is considered critical and what is not considered critical in a disaster.
Cindy, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm not sure if you are, I'm not seeing your screen.
Okay, you're not seeing my screen.
I'm not
Is
seeing.
any- Oh, well, I'm sorry.
And I know you created some beautiful openings.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Well, it says I'm sharing too. I don't know what happened. My apologies. Thank you, Marcia.
Yeah, here we go.
Okay, can you see my screen now? Gosh, yes, I don't want to miss out on the opportunity for you to see my beautiful slides. Can you see my screen now? Okay. Okay, should we start this whole thing over? No, we won't. I promise. Okay. Another reason for us to have a continuity of operations plan is because it makes us better prepared in a disaster. Just in general, as an agency, we have a better chance of sustaining our abilities during a disaster if we've done some preparedness in advance, of course. It reduces the downtime for the operations. So we've decided what those critical functions are. We have to do this, 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 and this. And, you know, the continuity of operations plan supports how we get those things done in different scenarios. So when should you use a COOP? Let's say you've written a continuity of operations plan, or maybe you haven't yet, but when would you need a COOP? You definitely would need a COOP in a major disaster situation. Let's say we had, of course, as California, let's say we had a big earthquake and your building is not running, your people are not available. You know, those essential functions that you have that need to continue to get done, how are you going to get those done? So in a major disaster, it makes sense that we would do a COOP. But how about some of the day-to-day inconveniences? And these are much more frequent, I believe. Things like we have a power outage. We have a heat event that causes a power outage in our building. A few years ago, when I was working for the county, construction crew was close to the county building on First Street, and they nicked a big power line underground. They were digging for something, I don't know. And anyway, they knocked out the power in the whole county building, and they said it would take them 3 days to resolve that issue. Well, all the departments within that building had continuity of operations plans. So they pulled their plans out and went, what do we do when we have a power outage? It's only going to, we know it's only going to be for 3 days, so we can adjust accordingly. But some of them came over to our office and worked in our emergency operations center. Some of them went to a library and worked in a library with laptops. Some of them went home for 3 days, but they had that all written into their plan. So they knew exactly what they were going to do and exactly what essential functions they had to keep going for those 3 days. So, what if there's a road closure? We've got Super Bowl coming up. We've got FIFA coming up. Those things are day-to-day inconveniences that you could use your COOP plan for. The COOP plan can be very flexible. The COOP plan could, using your COOP plan could be as simple as, how do we keep essential functions going when we've planned this event for our company recognition? Maybe we take everybody to the zoo for the day. What essential functions do we have to keep going? Who needs to stay behind and do those things? You can use your COOP plan for that kind of an event as well. So the key principles to continuity of operations planning, and you'll hear me say this many, many times, are figuring out what those essential services or essential functions are. Those things you have to keep running, you have to keep uh, up and going, or you have to get back up and going when the disaster hits as soon as possible. Those things that are either mandated or someone's depending on you, someone's life's depending on you to keep those services provided. So that's what one of the principles, that's the number one foundation of continuity of operations planning, is those essential services. One of the other things to consider in a continuity of operations planning is the ability to take care of your staff and your volunteers and your clients. If you've got clients in your office, making sure that they're safe, making sure that your staff and your volunteers are trained, they know how to implement a continuity of operations plan, and they are ready to do that. They're equipped to do that. They have the resources that they need. They know where those resources are and all those kind of things. And here's where I think nonprofits differ just a little tiny bit from government entities, but you have some backups in place. You have some redundancies built into your plan. So what if our building isn't working? Do we have somewhere else to go? Now, government, if, the example that I told you about the county building that had no power for 3 days, they just went to another county building. They've got buildings all over the county. So that was easy for them. But what about a little nonprofit that runs a daycare center? What are their redundancies when it comes to, we don't have a place for the children today. The building has been shaken a little bit and it's not safe to go in there. So building those kind of redundancies into your plan specifically for your agency are a little bit different than they are for government. And I think as we go through this a little bit, you'll see that that's kind of one of the catches, one of the issues that nonprofits have when it comes to continuity of operations planning. My recommendation in a situation like that is to partner with another agency doing similar things to what you're doing, because part of continuity of operations planning says, what happens if we've identified these 5 essential functions that we absolutely have to do, but we can't do them. We have no resources to do them. And that's called devolution. And once you get to a place where I can't do these things at all myself, who's going to do them? So partnering with another agency, maybe that preschool sends their children to another preschool that's safer or something to that effect. They partner with another like organization. Okay, so what should be in your continuity of operations plan? Can you guess what the first thing is? Essential functions. You're absolutely right. I heard your minds all saying that. So the difference between a continuity of operations plan and emergency response plan is a very fine line. And in some cases, especially with smaller organizations, some of them have actually written their continuity of operations into their emergency response plan. It makes it a little bit difficult to understand because there are some differences that make those two plans a little complicated when you merge them together. The first thing is that emergency plan is a response plan. Something's happened and you're responding to it. You have a tactical response. There's a fire in your building. You're looking to figure out how to get that fire put out. Whether you call the fire department, you put it out yourself, whatever that is, you're focused on the disaster. With continuity of operations planning, you're not focused on a disaster. You don't write a continuity of operations plan with a specific disaster in mind. You write a continuity of operations plan with the thought in mind that you're continuing those essential services that need to be done, no matter what the disaster is, whether it's a big disaster or a 3-day power outage, whichever it is, your continuity of operations plan is more focused on your proactive strategies rather than your tactical actions. So again, emergency response plan is reactive and continuity of operations planning is proactive. It's strategic. It's figuring out how to continue continue functioning even though there is a disaster happening. Okay. So how do we decide what those critical functions are? First of all, my recommendation is to sit down as a group or a subset of your operation, those people that are responsible for certain departments or for certain functions, and write down everything you do. Write down all the things that your organization does in a day. Put them all in a nice, tidy little spreadsheet, and I will give you a template to do that with at the end. Write down all those functions because you might miss something, and I was writing a continuity of operations plan for one of the cities in Santa Clara County, and I was working with the clerk recorder's office. And we were talking about, it happened to be during the pandemic, and I was talking to the clerk recorder, and she said to me, I need for the action or the function of picking up the mail to be an essential function. And I thought, well, is it really important to pick up the mail when there's a disaster happening? Is that really critical? And she said, yes, because that's how the city functions. Much of our money that comes into the city comes in through the physical mail. And if I can't pick up the physical mail and turn those checks over to finance to get them into our accounts, we don't function. So something as simple as picking up the mail. The other thing about continuity of operations planning is it's not forever planning. Continuity of operations planning has a time limit on it, if you will. It might vary a little bit depending on the disaster, but keeping those functions up and running until a couple of things happen. First of all, the disaster is over. If it's a small 3-day power outage, keeping my essential functions up and running for 3 days is not that difficult, maybe. But if it's a major earthquake and my building is destroyed and we still have to keep those functions up and running until we get another building, until what? Until our management team has determined what our new normal looks like. So giving that management team the opportunity to know that those essential functions are up and running, and they will be for 30, 60 days, whatever you've decided in your plan. And they can then have that time to come up with another plan for a longer term solution for keeping our organization alive and well. Maybe lease a new building, maybe whatever it might be, whatever the situation might be. So continuity of operations planning is a limited, it's the disaster happened, how are we going to keep things afloat until we get back to normal, or we have that new normal that has been defined by our management team. Okay. So, like I said, writing down all those functions, and then from that, peeling off the ones that maybe that fit those criteria that you've already identified. And like I said, the template has those criteria in it. Is it something that we absolutely need in the next 30 days? It could be very critical to your organization, but you don't need it right away. So it's not necessarily a critical function or an essential function. It might be the thing that your CEO considers their pet project. That does not necessarily make it an essential function. It might be something that your suppliers are depending on you to do. That might make it an essential function. So there are things that you'll need to consider with every single line item that you've written down. When you write down everything that you do, you go line by line. This function, do I need it in the next 30, 60 days? Is this something that somebody's depending on me for? Is this something that, and there's a whole series of questions that you can ask.
And I'll just add, even things like paying your bills or paying taxes or paying, it's possible that you can ask for extensions beyond 30 days. So you really have to say, is something bad going to happen if this event or this activity doesn't happen? So just throwing that out there as, because it is hard sometimes to say, no, this is critical. No, this is essential. No, it can wait. We don't want it to wait, but you really want to get as much off your plate as possible.
Absolutely. And thank you for bringing that up, Marcia, because you also bring up the fact that continuity of operations planning is not the plan that you put on the file cabinet, in the file cabinet to collect dust. It is the process of going through the plan. As you think about all those things that you do every day, and you think about whether or not they're essential, that knowledge is part of the process that is considered continuity of operations planning, determining whether or not we can pay our taxes or we can get an extension, recognizing the things that if you didn't have this plan, you would consider everything that has to be done when the disaster happens and get overwhelmed quickly. If you've got this plan in place, you can see what things you could eliminate off of the list of critical functions. And so therefore, what things you can focus your resources on, whatever resources you might have available to you when the disaster happens. Okay. Identifying those critical functions helps direct resources more effectively. And that's kind of what I'm talking about right now, is being able to say, for example, you've got a staff of 20 people and you have 3 functions that absolutely need to be done, but and only 5 of those people have the knowledge to do those functions, making sure that you've got some training for the other people, and that they also, if they're not involved in the continuity of operations plan, that they know what they're supposed to be doing when the disaster hits as well. But you can focus those resources. Maybe the receptionist isn't the one that picks up the mail on a day-to-day basis, but during a disaster, she's been given the task, the critical function of being the one that picks up the mail. I don't know, whatever that looks like for your organization. So let's talk just a little bit about delegation of authority and succession planning. The org chart that you see on the screen right now, if that person, and I'm going to just say person, because I can't tell if that's a male or female, but if the box on the top is your CEO and your CEO's in Tahiti when the disaster hits, which one of the 2 people underneath them is going to take on the responsibility of running the operations and implementing the continuity of operations plan? Is it the person on the left or the person on the right? Or is it the person that's off the page? Because you can see there's a line that leads to another person. So making sure that we know we have some clear lines of who's going to be doing what and who's in charge. I have never seen a situation more complicated by the fact that no one knows who to listen to than to have the CEO missing when something has to be decided. Even something as simple as I was driving down the street one day with an emergency management friend of mine, and there was a car accident. An elderly gentleman hit a power pole, knocked the power pole over his car, and we didn't know whether or not it had live wire attached to the power pole. And we jumped out of the car to help, but there were already 10 people trying to help this guy. One of them ran right in, grabbed him by the arm, pulled him out, could have been electrocuted. I mean, who knows? Nobody knows who's in charge in a situation, and it becomes a mess really quick. So having those clear lines of authority, I think is very important. And this is the plan that you write that stuff into, because this is the plan that it doesn't matter what the disaster is. You still need those clear lines, the clear delineation of who's doing what and who's in charge if that person isn't there. And equally, what is the succession planning? You might have the CEO may have 14 responsibilities that are part of critical functions, and maybe when the disaster hits, that responsibility gets spread out across several people. So who's in charge of what, and if they're not there, who's the backup for that? All good stuff in a continuity of operations plan. Okay, so what are the communication strategies? And that's another place that you can write things into your continuity of operations plan. Doesn't matter what the disaster is, we're going to need to communicate. Communication is the first thing that fails every time, no matter how much planning you do, by the way. But you can get better. It's the ability to get better at it that I think is very important. So having an effective communications plan, strong communications internally and externally, a trigger that says we are activating our continuity of operations plan. Everyone knows what that means. Everyone in the organization knows what that means. And they each have been trained to do what it is that they need to do when that call is made, when that information is shared. Who needs to know information? How do we communicate that information, making sure that we're not over sharing, giving information to some people that maybe they don't need to have, or reducing whatever redundancy of, let's not waste time with sharing things over and over again. The communication is so critical for not just the people that are written into the continuity of information, the continuity of operations plan, but also the people that are not written in. What do they do? And the clients that are not written in, what do they do? And how do we communicate that to them? And how do we communicate to the outside world that we are up and running, or we are not up and running, or we've moved to another location, that sort of thing. So let's navigate some of the challenges as they pertain to continuity of operations planning for CBOs and NGOs specifically, because I think you have some very specific limitations or issues to face and challenges that they're not insurmountable, but they certainly are things that need to be considered now while we've got some blue skies. By the way, I'm in Vancouver, Washington, and we don't have blue skies today. We've got some gray skies. But while there's not a disaster happening, what kind of things are challenging to CBOs and NGOs? One of them being the limited resources. I refer us back to that small preschool that is an operation that has very limited resources. So the challenges that they might face, the scarcity of human resources. They may not have enough instructors to come in, or they may not have a lunch program that has food being delivered on days when there's a disaster. That, those kind of things impact CBOs and NGOs more than they would government entities. So this one I don't actually have a specific answer for, but it is certainly something that needs to be considered. The consideration needs to be put in place. Marcia, I've got somebody on chat, or is that you?
No, Baldeep said, sorry, having an
Oh,
inconvenience at work with scarce resources. He can't clone himself, so he'll have to step out for now.
speaking of scarce resources, having some limited resources is absolutely an issue. Yeah. Stakeholder relationships. So you have, as an NGO, as a non-government organization, you have some stakeholder relationships that government may not have. You have a board that you have to answer to. You have funders that you might have to answer to. So you've got those kind of issues that managing, you may be managing multiple stakeholders. And so making sure that you write into your communications part, especially of your plan, how you will communicate with those people. Having one person that, reports to the board, and then give the board the responsibility of talking to the other stakeholders might be a direction that you could go. But that is another challenge, I think, that NGOs have that government entities don't have. But it can be written into your continuity of operations plan if you think about that in advance and get that into the plan and figure out what the process is to resolve that issue. And then, the unpredictable environment, the thought about the 3-day power outage and the county exec's office departments just moving to other buildings seems like a simple fix for them. But if you're a small organization and you don't have that ability, what do you do then? You might have to work from home. You might have some flexibility with that. You might have some laptops and some internet connection capabilities off-site that you might be able to tap into. You might have a sister agency that you may be able to send some staff to. You may be able to send your clients to a sister agency and send your staff to help support them. Those kind of things can be written into your continuity of operations plan. But those are challenges that are unique to non-governmental agencies. And navigating some of those challenges can be very different than it is from government. I always like to tell people that writing a plan is free. So if you don't have resources available to you to write a plan, yeah, you do, because writing a plan is free. I mean, it takes a piece of paper and a pen maybe, or a computer to write things down on, but it really truly is the process of sitting down and with the people that are involved and brainstorming what are those essential functions and how are we going to get those done under these circumstances. What are the circumstances? It doesn't even matter what the circumstance, the specific disaster is. How are we going to get them done with whatever the disaster impacted? It doesn't matter if it's an earthquake, a fire, a flood. If it impacted your ability to get on the internet, how are you going to get those essential functions done if you can't get on the internet? How are you going to get those essential functions done if people can't come into the building? How are you going to get those essential functions done under whatever the circumstances are?
Oh, I have one. How
Yes.
how do you transport goods and services if the power's out and you can't get to fuel
Yeah,
for multiple
absolutely.
days?
we had a few years ago in South County, we had a communications break. One of the communication, I want to say it was Verizon, had a breakdown in their system, and it caused Morgan Hill and Gilroy, which are in South County for those of you in Tennessee, and a little bit separated from other cities in the county. That whole south end of Santa Clara County was without communication. And you would think, oh, well, that's not a big deal. So what? I can't pick up my phone and talk, or maybe I can't be on my computer for an hour or two or whatever. No, it's a much bigger deal than that. 911 communication was down. So they had to transfer all the 911 calls up to the county communications hub. Um, you couldn't get gasoline, so the city of Morgan Hill and Gilroy had to try and pass information to people who were working in other areas in the county or even outside of the county and let them know that they wouldn't be able to get gasoline once they came into Morgan Hill or Gilroy because the pumps were not working. Not because the pumps were not working, but because the credit card that you put into the pump to pay for the gasoline wasn't working. So the communication for that credit wouldn't work. The grocery stores were shutting down because people needed cash to pay for groceries because you couldn't slide your ATM card into the little slot at the cash register and pay for your groceries. So it became a much bigger deal when it, initially didn't look like it was that big of a deal. Now that fortunately, Verizon got that issue resolved in just a few hours. But in the meantime, for you CERT people, the city of Morgan Hill put CERT people on every corner of their city at the ends of every block, and they gave them radios to radio into the emergency operations center in case there were emergency calls where they couldn't call out 911 and they needed an ambulance or something. And so they kind of bridged that gap a little bit with that sort of thing. But there are all kinds of issues like that you could, the impact of what that disaster might cause is what you need to focus on, not necessarily on whether it's a fire or a flood or an earthquake. I have a little bird outside my window who's trying to crack a nut on the windowsill. So if you hear tapping, that's what it is.
And has anything else popped up in anyone's mind as we're thinking about this? It's like, well, what if the power's out? How would that impact you? Or what if, well, what if you can't get in your building? Does anybody have anything that suddenly they realized? No? Okay.
I had an agency that I was working with in one of the cities for a department that I was working with in one of the cities for continuity of operations planning. And they were very close to a chemical plant. And they wrote into their plan what happens if there is a chemical plant accident and people can't get into the building. The structure was fine, but the building couldn't be used because of the chemicals in the air. So they wrote that into their plan, knowing that was a possibility for that particular department. Yeah.
Well, and you just made me think of another one that was just solved on the fly, but don't think that everything gets solved on the fly. But during COVID, people couldn't come to work, right? And so now you have staffing issues. And when you have staffing issues, what do? Well, up until COVID, there were pretty much, it was working remotely was not allowed. But all of a sudden, working remotely must happen. And having those conversations before you realize that you have to use it would be much easier and less stressful on those IT people trying to figure out how to suddenly make everybody's um, home environments accessible for computers and Wi-Fi and ergonomics and all of those things that happen to keep your workforce in place. Um,
I that it's interesting that you say that, Marcia, because one of the cities that I did continuity of operations planning for, um, we just finished their plans um, only maybe 6 months before COVID hit, and their IT department had already requested additional funding in the budget to consider things just like the possibility that people may not be able to work in their offices. And so they were just purchasing a bunch of modems and a bunch of laptops and and the human resources department was writing into the continuity of operations plans contingencies for people, the policy for people to be able to work from home. And when COVID hit, they had that stuff in place. So I got lots of emails and calls from different departments in that city saying, thank God we got our plans in place just before this disaster hit, because it was so helpful to our departments. We knew what we had to do and we knew what the challenges were, and we had already started working through how to get those challenges met. So it was actually pretty cool.
and Daisy has put in the chat, she wants to know if we include active shooter situations in continuity of operations. I can tell you that there was a shooting in Santa Barbara at um, a regional center for people, I believe, with access and functional needs quite a few years ago now. But we had a representative of the organization come up to talk to us about what happened. And it was not anything that you would really think besides, okay, people died, so we lost some staff and we need to do memorial services and things need to be cleaned up. But the thing that they had not anticipated at all was the number of people that did not want to come back to work because they were so traumatized.
Mhm.
And so there was mental health that needed to happen. And then they didn't want to fire people because they had been traumatized and didn't want to come back to work. So they had to start hiring temporary employees to fill the positions until people were, you know, feeling like they could come back. And that was a huge aha. That's like, who thought about that before? And that definitely, anything that has to do with your losing staff and maybe not wanting to replace them, but needing to fill roles, that is something to have agreements in place with temporary agencies to do that.
Yeah, that's a great one. And thank you for bringing that up, Daisy, because, like I said before, the specific disaster is not what's as consequential in continuity of operations planning, because in the scenario that Marcia just gave us, there are response to the active shooter disaster, mental health and those kind of things, needing to help people be able to work through the issues of the active shooter, the memorials, and all of that is response to the disaster. But the fact that people aren't wanting to come back to work is continuity of operations planning. How do you get those essential functions done when you don't have the people to do them? And it doesn't matter why those people are not there. What matters is that those people are not there. The people that normally do this job, and this is a critical job to our organization, are not here to do this job. Who's going to do the job instead? And if we can't find anyone, how do we find resources that can get the job done? Do we go to a temporary agency, like Marcia said? Do we go to a partner agency and see if they can help? Do we shut down that essential function and give it to someone else to do for our clients or whatever? the whole thought about how do we get our essential functions done when there are no people to do them is continuity of operations planning. Whether it's active shooter, whether it's earthquake, fire, flood, doesn't matter. That's response to the disaster. The impact is we don't have staff to get these essential functions done. And that's continuity of operations. Did that answer your question, Daisy?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. And of course that, that whole being flexible and, because of COVID, I mean, I think very few good things came out of COVID in my personal opinion. But one of the things that came out of COVID is the whole concept of having the ability to work from home. Is it ideal in a day-to-day situation? Not necessarily, but do we need to write it into continuity of operations planning? It certainly is the simplest, least expensive way to continue some of our essential functions. It resolves a lot of those issues, like we don't have a building and we don't have, a printer, or we don't have internet, or we don't have communications in our building. Those kind of issues can be resolved from simply having a work from home policy in place that's attached to our continuity of operations plan. Okay, so let's develop a plan. What do you think? So some of the steps for developing a plan, and I've kind of gone over some of this already, but let's just take a little bit of a look at it again. First of all, I'm looking for some responses from you at this point. And because it's such a small group, if you don't want to write in the chat, you would rather just speak out, please just go ahead and do that. But can you name, just off the top of your head, the top 2 or 3 functions that your agency needs to get done in a disaster, no matter what? They're the ones that are going to support your mission. They're the ones that you're mandated to do. They're the ones that your clients are depending on.
I can go first.
Sure.
Our food bank
Mhm.
is our senior services, and I would say our legal services.
And why would you say your legal services?
Time frames, even though maybe we're locally having a disaster doesn't mean that if there's deadlines for our immigration legal services, those aren't going to get extended.
Mhm.
So those have to be attended to immediately.
Okay. Okay. And, there are no wrong answers here. I mean, each agency has their own decisions to make about what's essential to their agency and what isn't. So go ahead. Did somebody else have something to say?
I heard a little feedback, but I'm not sure. But that did make me think. So let's say you can't. You don't, the people are just not there. Do you have a partner organization that could take on those cases?
So for me, specifically for our organization, we are lucky to have 3 additional offices in different areas.
Okay.
When we are out of Stockton, we have 2 offices that are from one extreme. They're from different side of town of Stockton, and then we have one in Sonora and then one in Modesto, which are both one's about an hour away, the other one's about 45 minutes away. So we could also have staff working out of those areas. These essential services are actually offered out of all those offices. So
Perfect.
would be able to transfer services to be able to work. I think the only one would probably be our food pantry, which is locally. But we do have partners.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, and that's what we're talking about. If you only have one building,
Mhm.
then you need partners. If you have multiple buildings, then planning one is transferring that responsibility to another building. Problem two is if your staff can't transfer, what's the impact for the continuity of operations for that building? Well, they need to find other people, or can you bring them from other offices? So, it's cascading. It's like, well, if this happens and this happens, but you can get to the end. There, you
Mhm.
can get to a place where, I mean, if all else fails, we shut down. And that's always the final continuity of operations. We can't do it anymore. But that hopefully will get buy-in from your management that we don't, that's not an option. Well, it is an option if we don't plan. So, yeah, but that's good. You just take yourself down the rabbit hole a little ways, and then it helps you solve one thing at a time.
Mhm.
Absolutely. And then just write it down and you've got your plan. There you go.
Yeah. And
Boom.
seriously, it doesn't have to be a big old multi-page document. It could be a paragraph that says, if this happens, we're going to do this.
Mhm.
And nobody is checking for how many pages your continuity of operations plan is.
Just make sure you tell everybody that's involved what the plan is.
Yeah. And the shorter, the better. If you really expect anyone to read it, the shorter, the better.
Yeah. And
I think that
the fewer critical functions you have, the better off you are as well, because are going to be circumstances that you're not going to think of. There are going to be impacts on your agency that you didn't even know that those Martians were going to come from some other place and invade your building. You didn't even know that, so you didn't write that into your plan. That's the joy of continuity of operations planning. You probably wrote what the impact of that would be, but there are going to be impacts that you haven't even thought up. So making sure that your critical functions list is really truly what absolutely has to get done. Because if you've got 45 things on your critical functions list and only 30 people to do them, you're going to work those people to death. And that's not going to be good either for your organization or for your staff. Keep those critical functions limited to the ones that really truly are what we need to keep our organization afloat until we figure out another plan. Anybody else have an idea about 2 or 3 of the functions that they would consider critical? Remember, there's no wrong answers. We just want to hear.
Well, obviously, our whole mission is to feed people in the community. So when there's a disaster, we need to try to feed the existing clients that we have. And then also, there may be new ones because of the disaster, right? And so working with those groups such as the Red Cross or the counties to do those new. But certainly, we have to get the food in. And then we have to get it out, and then and then it has to be distributed as well, and having relationships that we do with various agencies across the 2 counties of who can best get that food out to the most people the most efficiently. So having those relationships of who are going to be the go-to places to do that the best in a disaster situation.
Several good points. Boy, you just covered a whole bunch of great stuff right there, and just in that little statement. First of all, people are depending on you, and that's critical. That's what makes it critical. So what is it that I have to do to get that food from where it is to the mouth of the person that needs to eat it? That is all a critical path. So all the things that happen along that channel, you can
Right.
just write all those things into your critical functions. So, it makes it very simple for you in that respect. The other point that I heard you make, which I haven't even spoken to, is there are going to be times when your organization might be tasked with increasing a critical function. You may have, for example, I feed people is my function, my day-to-day function. That's our company's mission, is to feed people. And in a disaster, there are going to be more people that need to be fed. So I might need to step up my operation rather than just keep it alive. So how can I maybe get volunteers, or maybe have a procedure for other agencies that have staff that need a place to work when the disaster's happening, and they don't have critical functions that need to be done by that staff. Maybe we can bring some of those people in to help step up your critical function of feeding people, because you're going to need to feed more people. So writing those kind of things into your plan too is certainly getting it down to that granular level. But and I would say, a secondary step to getting your continuity of operations plan down, first write those critical functions down for your own agency, and then recognize the possibility that you may need to increase your operation in a disaster. And certainly your example is definitely one of those. Anybody else? Okay, so as we have considered these critical functions, what kind of resources or contingency plans are we going to need in those to fulfill those critical functions? What kind of things what people will we need? What buildings will we need? What vehicles will we need? What communication will we need? Who needs to know that communication? All of those resource evaluations as they pertain to each one of those critical functions are the next thing you want to write into your plan. So come up with the functions, come up with the resources to get those functions done, and get those things written into your plan. Some of it you might be able to do on the fly, especially if you've got, I know what I need to do, and I know what I need to have in order to do that. If you've got those two things written down and they're solid, you're on your way to a great continuity of operations plan, because you've got your foundation put in place already. One of the things that people don't think about when it comes to continuity of operations planning that is equally as important to the whole process of how do I take it apart piece by piece, what's critical, what has to get done, what are those resources to get that stuff done, and then how do I bring things back to normal? How do I bring back on board the things that were not written into the continuity of operations plan? How do I bring the staff back in? When is the right time and place to do those kind of things? How do we reconstitute our organization and bring us back to normal, or whatever the new normal looks like? And writing that into your continuity of operations plan as well is a critical part to having a completed plan, a plan that actually gives you some something, a roadmap for how to navigate whatever the disaster is, the impacts that come along with that disaster. Questions, thoughts, concerns, experiences?
Yeah, I have an experience on the
Sure.
reconstitution. Yeah, I mean, that was almost harder for us in some way. We changed, because of the pandemic, we changed the way we distributed food. We went to boxing food instead of a farmer's market style. And it's just so expensive and so labor intensive that we needed to move back to farmer's market. But that transition back has been such a lift. I mean, we had to have a whole project for it. We had to convince our partners that going back was the right thing to do. And it just, so, I mean, that was almost more work than the quick work of changing how we did things.
Yeah. Yeah, boy, I can certainly see that being a very physical example of exactly what we're talking about with reconstitution. a lot of organizations are struggling still with the impacts of COVID. Doesn't matter what that COVID was the disaster. The fact that we didn't have our staff in the office is what the disaster was. And a lot of people are having a very hard time getting their staff back into the office because they were out for so long. And the effects of that have, really had an impact on those employees. And, we learned to live with everyone working from home for so long. Yeah, a few things fell through the cracks and we couldn't get some stuff done, but we stuck with that continuity of operations essential functions list, and we held on to it for dear life, and some of the things that needed to be done in the office kind of got swept under a carpet a little bit, and they became things that were a little more difficult to get happening when people were refusing to come back into the office. I see that all the time with organizations, especially that bringing staff back or bringing those processes that prior to the disaster back in the normal way that we did them before as a huge issue. So, making sure that our staff knows we're going to be out of the office for this duration. And after that, you're coming back into the office. We are going to do our process with cardboard boxes for a period of time, but at some point we're going to go back to our old process because it's more effective economically for our operation. Those are absolutely critical things to write into your plan and to make that whole process a little bit easier and a little bit smoother on everyone concerned. So, okay, you figured out what the critical stuff is. You figured out what resources you need, what people, you've thought through gaps, you've talked about contingencies, you've figured out how to bring the whole thing back to normal or whatever the new normal is. And in the process, you're starting to write some of that stuff down. You've got some sketches, write it down all into a nice little package. And there you go. You got a plan. Boom. What is it? Frank's your uncle or whatever that statement is. I don't remember. It's as simple as that. It doesn't have to be a complicated plan. It could be something as simple as a spreadsheet with a list of critical functions and then columns that say, here's the resources for this function. Here's the people for this function. Here's some of the contingency thought process. And like I said before, the process, going through the process is 98% of it, because having the people in the room to do that think tank kind of process, thinking the process through the what if scenarios is really truly the plan. Writing it down is for the people that weren't there so that they know what it is as well. Okay, so one of the things that, after we wrote 53 continuity of operations plans for the 53 departments in Santa Clara County, I did a lot of training as an emergency manager for the county, and many, many times people from different departments would come to my emergency operations center to take certain kinds of training. And every time they took a training with me, one of the first things I asked them was, how many of you, raise your hands, know that your department has a continuity of operations plan? No hands went up. And my next statement was always, you don't know whether or not you're written into that plan then. And so consequently, my challenge to you is to go back to your department and ask your department head, what does our continuity of operations plan look like? Am I written into it? Because I need to know whether or not I'm available to make that kind of a commitment. Have I been trained to do what it is that the plan says I'm going to do? And when you write staff into your plan, when you write the resource of what your staff is, you don't write in, Sally Smith is going to do da da da. you write in Sally Smith's title. So, you know, the Sally Smith might be the logistics person for your day-to-day operations. You write in logistics director or whatever the title is. So then if it's not Sally, it's somebody else, and it'll be easier to slot someone into Sally's space in that delegation of authority place if the plan is written by the title. But making sure that everyone that's written into that plan knows what that plan is and knows how to implement that plan and knows what they're supposed to do, where their resources are to do what they're supposed to do, and what the contingencies, what the notes are about how, you know, maybe we don't have to do it this exact way. Maybe we use cardboard boxes to get the meal boxes together in this situation, or the process is a little bit different, and they know what the new process is. Those are all part of the training and awareness for our staff. Also, what are the people that are not written into the plan supposed to do? If they're not written into the plan, and boy, my suggestion to you is write as many of them into the plan as you can, because you'll need contingency staff, maybe. You'll need delegation of authority. What if the director's in Tahiti? What if the department head for this particular department isn't available? What if the senior fill in the blank isn't here today? You know, other people need to be trained to do those roles on a day-to-day basis. So they also need to be able to do those roles and to pick up that responsibility during a disaster. So get as many of them involved as you can. But at the same time, the ones that aren't involved, they need to know what to do, because they, you know, if they're trying to make it into the office and the office isn't even open, that's going to be a problem. And then test that plan, you know, do some kind of an exercise. We have mock mania happened, and we have here's the impacts. It doesn't matter what the disaster is. Write down, here's the impacts. Here's what it impacted our power. It impacted our ability to communicate. It impacted our ability to come into the office, you know, and how, you know, and let people kind of walk through the process, the people that are going to be doing those things. Go see where those spare supplies are that are at, you know, your sister agency. You know, we've set up some additional laptops and some modems over there, and, you know, make sure that they can figure out how to get those up and running in an alternate location. Make sure that they know what to do if they're not written into the plan, you know, that they're supposed to stay at home, but you don't get just go on vacation. You have to, you know, I had an HR person say to me, you know, when we released people for COVID, they all just went home and thought they didn't even have to check in. You know, we had to write in the middle of the disaster a policy for making sure that the people that are not part of the continuity of operations plan check in periodically to determine whether or not we're ready for reconstitution of the plan. So, you know, that those kind of policies need to be considered as well. And when you test your plan, you'll see that stuff. You know, oh, I'm not written into the plan, I'm going home then, you know. Just do a mock disaster, and that will help you to be able to come up with some of the things that maybe you've missed and that might need to be updated in your plan. I always recommend that you periodically, and it depends on how often you have a turnover of staff, but you periodically have some kind of procedure in place. If someone's coming on board and they're written into the plan and they're brand new to your agency, part of their onboarding process needs to be, and by the way, here's our continuity of operations plan, and here's the expectation of your title for that plan. And make sure that they know that right from the very beginning when they first come on board. It'll make it a heck of a lot easier. And then also get a little think tank of people together. You know who knows this stuff. You know who knows what the procedures are for the essential functions and what the details are on how to distribute that food or how to box those packages or how to manage those volunteers. Get those people together periodically, little think tank. Let's look at the plan and see whether or not it's actually still in effect. Did we find out anything in the last year that might have changed the plan? Do we need to make some modifications? And go through those mock disasters periodically. They don't have to be expensive. You don't have to give people time off. Make them pretend like they're taking time off. Do it for an hour or 2 hours and, really just get people into a room and do some intensive discussion around, you don't have to physically take out, supplies or file cabinets or whatever. Just, talk through the whole thing. Just do that periodically. I think the more often you do that, the better, the more familiar your staff is about the plan, the easier it's going to be to implement that plan when it needs to be implemented. So, in summary, let's build a resilient agency. And here's how we do it. We know what our mission critical functions are. We know what resources we need to get those things done. We've addressed some of the specific challenges to our organization, and we've written it down. It's simple as that. 1, 2, 3. Let's just get something down on paper. If your plan is 8 pages long, that's long enough. That's all you need, and then we make sure our staff knows how to do it and we exercise it periodically. Okay, well,
I'll just say that the staff, in theory, the staff, most of them were involved in the discussion related to the part of it that they're supposed to implement. So they creating the ongoing training or the onboarding for new people, it should, if you could pass that off to the department, it's like, this is part of your onboarding new folks, is they need to look at what your contingency plans are in a disaster for that part of the department. So I would do that. And then before we end, go ahead, Cindy, but then I want to share another resource that I found.
Yeah, sure. So, like I've said, continuity of operations planning is a strategic planning process. It's an investment in your agency. It will help you to navigate those crises or the impacts of whatever the disaster is. It'll protect your people, your mission, your clients. It will also give you the ability to continue to provide those services to your community during a disaster. Doesn't matter whether it's earthquake, flood, fire, pandemic, whatever it is. Okay, Marcia, what you got?
Okay, so while we were talking, because I have now become a big fan of ChatGPT, I asked ChatGPT, which is free, but it'll only let you do so much at a time, but it did everything I wanted for this. So I asked for the key components of a continuity of operations plan, and it outlined just what you said. Very, very simple, short sentences. So then I said, well, what are essential functions if I am a food bank? And you could do that for any organization. And so it gave me some things: food acquisition and inventory with a few bullets, food storage and safety with a few bullets, food distribution. So then I went a step deeper because one of them was transportation and logistics. And I was curious to see if it would bring up fuel. It does say ensuring fuel supply, but then I said, what are some solutions for transportation and logistics? And it gave me a list. It said, would you like me to turn this into a checklist? And it prioritized it by must not be interrupted for 0 to 12 hours, must resume within 1 to 3 days. It's like, now I'm not saying that it's all right, but it sure does give you a head start instead of going into a meeting with a blank sheet and saying, okay, we need to write this plan. It's, I would definitely try it. ChatGPT has just become one of my friends for inspiration on what we need to get going so that you can see it. It's actually not that much, and you can keep going deeper if you needed to, and more specific. And that's the thing, is it gives you good information if you put in good questions.
And I would, at the same time, warn you to not write a ChatGPT plan and then not tell anyone you did that. You know, use it as a template, use it as a backbone maybe to go, but go through the process with your team as well. You know, make sure that you have made it exclusive to your organization, and you've thought through all of your own contingencies as well.
Yeah, for sure. And maybe you just take the major bullet points and you take that to each part of the organization and you ask them to give you some answers, and then you say, let's see what ChatGPT said. Oh, we forgot one. Or no, you got more than ChatGPT did. But it's a good way. I mean, it's kind of fun to, let's test your knowledge. Have you really thought it through? But absolutely, it's still the planning process. You do still need to sit down and go through it and make sure that you accept this as your plan, that you're not forgetting something.
Yeah, for sure.
And when you do remember something that you forgot, just add it to the plan. I don't know that you have to have it approved by anybody or anything, but just go in and update it. It's a living document.
Absolutely. When you update it, make sure you share that information with everyone
Yep.
as well.
Yeah.
So, questions, comments, concerns?
I have a question.
Yes.
So when you are putting together the plan, who are your, maybe like, who should be at the table when this is planning? Because to me, I'm thinking, okay, we have, 12 programs, 12 program managers. Each program manager knows their program specifically and would know more hands-on if that's something that they could stop, or if they could continue, or do they have to continue working? Obviously, our director probably be the one who would make the call at the end. But I mean, how would you navigate that? Like, how would it be? Because, for instance, if I'm putting the COOP, if I'm the one of them putting together, my program is disaster services. But what if maybe there's another program manager who thinks like their program is essential? Like, how do you guys navigate that? Or have you guys had that situation?
Sure. How many staff do you have?
Total in the
Mhm.
agency?
Yeah.
Ooh, I am probably close to 100.
Okay. When I was working with the county and we did departments, I'll liken your questions to a department that, the Department of Social Services. Department of Social Services has 2,300 staff, and they, of course, do a large number of things within that department. So what the director of the Department of Social Services did when we were writing continuity of operations planning was they had 6 kind of mini departments within their department that they broke their plan into, and they brought in the lead for each one of those departments and had those departments do a little mini exercise of what are the essential functions. And they then walked through the process in parallel with what we did. It took us 18 months, by the way, to do our planning, because we didn't want the planning process to interrupt day-to-day operations, but at the same time, we wanted it to have some importance. And so we spread it out. We had also, I was one person doing 53 departments. So we spread it out so that we had 5 or 6 departments every 6 weeks do elements of the plan. So we would do, let's figure out what the essential functions are. That's the first thing that has to happen. That's the foundation of our plan. So that social services brought in their 6 leads and said, what are the essential functions of your department? Or each of you take this spreadsheet and write down everything that your department does, and then go with your department leads, look at each one of those line items and determine, do we have to have it in the next 30 days? Is it important that, is someone depending on it? Is there a mandate that we have to, what of the list of things that we do we need to consider essential? And they could come up with the essential functions for their whole for each of their mini departments. Then they brought that back to the director, and the director's admin incorporated all those things into their plan. Now, I will tell you, they had 2,300 employees, and they have lots and lots of programs. And they did have a rather extensive essential functions list. And it made a much more complicated plan than, say the tax assessor's office, which is they do one thing, that's not true, but they, their list of essential functions are pretty small. There are some departments that didn't have any essential functions. We let them go. They didn't have to write a continuity of operations plan because everything they did was not necessarily something that fit the criteria of, we have to have this happening in 30 days after the disaster. We have to have it back up and running within 2 weeks of the disaster. People are depending, there was no mandates. There were departments that didn't have a continuity of operations plan. One of them is libraries. Libraries didn't have a continuity of operations plan. They are written into disaster plans. They are written into mass care and shelter plans, but they don't have a continuity of operations plan. They don't need to keep library books on the shelves or keep the library process happening during a disaster. So, the response functions that they had as it pertained to standing up a shelter, standing up a communications hub, or those kind of things, were responding to the disaster. The COOP stuff they didn't necessarily need. So I would say to you that, what the departments are, bring them together so that you don't have to write down everything that every department does, and have those departments walk through the process in little mini sessions. I'll give you the spreadsheet that they can write down all of their activities on, and then walk it through the process and see whether or not they have, some of them may not have any essential functions. And if that's the case, then those are people you can look at for cross-training, for shortage of staff, making sure that some of those people get cross-trained in other areas so that they can accomplish some of the other essential functions. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. It's trying to get an idea how we would have navigate it if that would be something that would come up.
Yeah, I wouldn't, if I was doing your continuity of operations plan for you, I would ask you to bring together, you've got 100 or 200 people. I would ask you to bring together the people that you think have the most knowledge about the functions of that department or division or activity. It might not be the person that's in charge of that department. It might be the engineer that does the work, or the person that, it might not be the lead of that department. But bring together, I would say, in a situation like that, maybe 5 to 10%, depending on on what kind of activities you think that they would be doing. and let them tell you what what all their functions are, and make that one of your first sessions.
Thank you.
Any other questions, thoughts, concerns, ideas? Okay, this training was brought to you by a Homeland Security grant called UASI, which stands for Urban Area Security Initiatives. And they gave us funding to do this training. Therefore, they have certain criteria that they are looking for from us, and I would ask you to tell me what that is through a survey. So please, please, please fill out the survey. It will come up automatically when you exit this this Zoom session. This is how we get paid, and it's also, you know, I mean, use it as an opportunity to share whatever you want to share. It's how we make this better. You know, I didn't tell you enough about fill in the blank, you know, say that. And next time I'll say more about that. So if you would please fill out the survey, I would certainly appreciate it. And I'm sure that our grants people would as well. I also want to just point you to Cadre's website, where there are tons of resources available to you. Even if you're in Tennessee, Don, you're certainly welcome to take a look at Cadre's website. There's a calendar at the bottom on the left of the homepage that gives you all of the events that we have coming up. Those community support networks that Marcia was talking about at the beginning, they're all doing kickoff meetings over the course of the next few months, and all of those kickoff meetings are on that calendar of events. I would also point you to right above the word cadre there in the center of the page. There's a little list of words. Events takes you to the calendars. Preparedness takes you to some of the trainings that we've done in the past, and you can look those up by subject. For response and relief, there is lots of information there, as well as in the recovery section. In the about section, there is a place where you can see all of the community support networks, what they're about, and get a little more information in and including the ability to participate in any of those community support networks at your leisure. All of our email addresses are first name @ cadresv.org. So mine is Cindy, Marcia's is Marcia, and our website is cadresv.org.